The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Perspectives. My name is David Schoeneman. I'm your host in this program. I'm also the alderman for Ward 3 here in Nashua. On Perspectives, we take a look at a variety of issues on the state, local, and even the national level that are of interest to Nashua residents and taxpayers. We do this so we can keep you informed about what's happening in your government locally, nationally, and of course on the state level. We want to make sure that you're informed so every time Election Day rolls around, you're able to vote wisely. Well, today is the 15th of December, and we are 38 days after our last election, which of course was in November, the presidential election cycle in 2016. We often speak, when a new president is coming in, of his first 100 days in office. Well, today we're going to take a look at President-elect Trump's first 38 days as president-elect. He seems to have been hitting the ground running, and I think a lot has happened since Election Day. With me to talk about that today is Gary Lambert. Gary Lambert is a colonel in the U.S. Marine Corps, retired. He also served 2 years as state senator. He's a good friend and a fellow resident of Ward 3. Gary, thank you very much for coming in.
Dave, it's always a pleasure. As I tell people, you're my favorite alderman because you're my alderman. You do a great job. I think you do the best job down there, and I want to thank you very much for all you do.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the support.
Yeah.
You know, as you know, being a senator in the past, it can be a thankless job.
It is.
A lot of hours and often some criticism and not a lot of thanks. And so whenever I hear that somebody in the ward especially likes what we're doing, I'm glad to hear it.
Doing a great job, and from what I hear from other Ward 3 voters, it's the same.
Well, thank you very much. So President-elect Trump has been elected now just for 38 days, not in office yet.
Right.
He's not the candidate that I supported. You and I have touched base on this, not in the primary, and you didn't support him in the primary either. Nevertheless, we ended up here, and now, even though he wasn't the guy that we chose from the beginning, we want to look very closely to see what he's doing, because he's going to be setting the direction for at least the next 4 years, quite possibly the next 8 years, if we're lucky.
I hope so.
I hope so too. So in 38 days, he has done more, arguably, certainly more high-profile decisions than I think President Obama may have done in 8 years.
I agree.
So let's take a look at some of the things that he's done, and maybe you can share some of your insights on who he may be modeling himself after from the past.
Well, I think the main thing, Dave, we'll get into the specific candidates in a minute, but I'm just, both of us, as you mentioned, did not support him in the beginning. We supported other candidates. But I have been extremely impressed since Election Day about not only how he's handled himself, the people that he's picked to surround himself with. Every time I turn on the news and the new pick is there, and I'm like, man, that is just a great person for that job once I find out about him.
Right.
And I think what we'll get into here in a minute with some of these specific people is they don't necessarily agree with Trump on a lot of issues. A lot of these folks he did not know before the election. They did not support him before the election. They're not supporters. They're not financial backers. And I think that says a lot about the man, the candidate, and our next to be president.
I think it does too, because these folks aren't political hacks.
Right.
It's not someone who said, here's my $1 million. By the way, if you get in, I'm expecting something. And one of the whole problems with Washington or government at any level is the crony capitalism or crony decision-making that goes on, where someone contributes, spends money, and gets something in return. We see it right here.
That's the cycle,
in
supposedly.
The National Board of Aldermen. Some of
the
the members of the Board of Aldermen have taken money from certain unions, and you can take a look at the votes. And I won't say that there's causation there. They don't vote the way they do because of the money they took, but there's a very strong correlation between taking money, getting financial support, and then tracking a certain way in your votes. And here we see President-elect Trump choosing people who weren't necessarily his financial backers. They probably voted for him, but they weren't his financial backers. And I think they're not political hacks. And so we're getting people in these key roles that aren't political hacks.
Top on the agenda for me, I'm a former Marine.
Sure.
Spent 35 years in the Marine Corps. And did not work directly for General Mattis, but worked with him in certain areas. Like when I was in Quantico, he was in Quantico. When I was in Iraq, he was there. Just a stand-up guy.
Right.
I mean, the Marine's Marine. If you had to ask anybody in the Marine Corps, who would you want, either as the Commandant, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or Secretary of Defense, it'd be James Mattis. So he's known as the warrior monk in the Marine Corps because he basically has devoted his life to the study of war, strategy, policy, that type of thing. He had a library so big it outgrew him. He had to give it over to the Marine Corps University.
Wow. That's something. So he's well studied.
Well studied, probably one of the most well-read people out there.
Some of these picks, of course, are made because you want someone good on your staff,
Yep.
but you also want to send a message. And I think about the message that the United States has been sending over the last 8 years, let's say. I remember seeing a picture in the paper a number of years ago, probably 6 or 7 years ago, where Obama is bending over, kissing the ring of someone in Saudi Arabia,
Right.
a prince or a king in Saudi Arabia. What kind of message does that send? And we compare that to the message that's being sent by a pick like General Mattis. What kind of message do you think our enemies, and we certainly have them,
Yeah.
a lot of enemies
Sure.
of freedom, what kind of message should our enemies be seeing in Trump's pick of General Mattis?
Yeah. Well, the first message is wake up and smell the coffee. Let's talk about Iran, number one. To quote General Mattis, General Mattis, before he retired, was chief of Central Command. Central Command is all the Middle East with the exception of Israel. He said, I woke up with 3 issues every day. And the 3 issues were Iran, Iran, and Iran. So if you're Iran right now and you know about General Mattis, you got to be shaking in your boots. And you got to be thinking that they're on to us. They know what we're about. They know we're the sneaky little people that we are, that they have been in terms of nukes and weapons and not keeping their end of the deal on agreements. So I think you got to really, like I say, it's time to wake up and smell the coffee if you're Iran.
Now, you wouldn't characterize General Mattis as a warmonger.
Oh, absolutely not. He is.
Okay, so he's not looking for a fight.
Oh, no, he's not looking for a fight. But if you pick a fight, and
You're going to get a fight.
You're going to get a fight. And I'll give you another quote. You know, when he was in Iraq and he was the leader of the 1st Marine Division, he walked up to a town leader, a chieftain, a tribe leader, whatever, and basically said, look, I'm begging you with tears in my eyes that we come in peace, and I want peace with you. But if you mess with us, look out. You know, so it's the big stick mentality, which is walk soft, carry a big stick. Not looking for a fight, but man, if you want to get one, you're going to get one. Yeah, and that's what you need. If you want peace, you know, I remember seeing a sticker years ago when I was in the Marine Corps. You don't see it very often anymore. The Marines, the peacekeepers. That's what we're there for. We're there. We're not there. We don't want to go to war. General Mattis doesn't want to go to war. No. We want to prevent us. And how you prevent people from going, the country from going to war is a strong defense.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think it's a strong posture too. You don't come in as a supplicant. The United States does not need to be a supplicant. Right. And I think sometimes the Obama administration carried the wrong message of the United States as seeking something from you out there and begging you for it. And we're not begging anybody.
We're not begging, and you know, I say this because I've been to a lot of countries with the Marine Corps, and certainly a lot are not as developed as the United States. And I got to tell you, in most of these places, you speak from a position of strength. That's it. That's all they understand. I mean, a lot of these are warrior cultures. Even Iraq, you know, and Iran, warrior cultures that they're used to fighting constantly. And if you don't speak from a position of strength, they don't respect you.
They won't respect you. No. And if they don't respect you, I think that makes us much more vulnerable.
Absolutely.
So, of course, he's a retired Marine Corps general.
Right.
Actually, maybe he's not retired. Well, he is now. He is now, yes.
Yeah. He retired, like I said, he was the chairman of Central Command.
So, Marine Corps general. We also have General Kelly, who is the Secretary of Homeland Security. Right. And he's former Marine as well.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about General Kelly.
General Kelly, another stand-up guy. General Kelly, unfortunately, holds the title and the recognition of being the highest ranking officer to lose a child in either Iraq or Afghanistan.
I read that. Yes.
Lieutenant Kelly died, I believe it was in Iraq. Just really unfortunate. Tough to lose a child anyway, but he has made that loss really, he's been on speaking tours about the loss, talked to a lot of, Gold Star mothers, Gold Star families about it. He's just a great guy. And perfect man for the job of Homeland Security.
So there should be no sense among the American public that the folks that are leading us don't know what kind of price is being paid.
No, they know what price is being paid, and they're in good hands. And, I think we mentioned this briefly, but these gentlemen, General Mattis, General Kelly, they're apolitical, right? It's not like they were seeking office or whatever. Trump picked them because they're the best people for the job. General Mattis, I got to tell you, General Mattis will, if everybody that knows him, he'll retire on the spot. He'll just give it all up if it doesn't work out. I mean, he's not there to be a yes man. I believe he talked to President-elect Trump about torture. I don't know if you heard that conversation. No. And as you probably know, President-elect Trump has talked about bringing back waterboarding, etc. And General Mattis said, don't do it. He goes, I can get more out of a guy with a beer and a pack of cigarettes if you let me have the beer and a pack of cigarettes. And so Trump was, very amazed by what he said and how he said it. And like I said, a lot of people Trump has picked that he doesn't agree with personally on a lot of issues.
Sure.
But they're the right people for the job.
Let's talk about this guy, Ryan Zink.
Yeah.
Now, he's the Secretary of Interior.
No, he's a congressman right now out of Montana.
Oh, okay.
But he's been nominated, you're right.
Yes, to be Secretary of Interior.
Which, I don't mean to
please.
jump in. As I understand it, I've never lived out west. But out west, you're more concerned about who the Secretary of Interior is than the President. You're going to deal with them more. That's who has more of an impact on your land. There's a lot of
federal land out there.
Okay? The good thing about the congressman here, by the way, another military guy, retired Navy SEAL. He's with the Navy. We will forgive that. I mean, I would have preferred to have another Marine there, but no, I'm only kidding. But just a great guy. And once again, has some differences with President-elect Trump on issues of federal land going back to the states. So there's a lot of folks, especially within the Republican community, who would like to see federal land going back to the states. Okay, the congressman, on the other hand, says, "Hey, wait a minute. Federal land is for the people, and if we give it back to the states, that we may lose some of those natural resources that are so important out there." So the fact that he's picked someone that doesn't agree with him, but is really a stellar guy. In fact, the only bad thing about him taking that job is they thought he would be the guy to take on the Democratic senator, one of the senators that's coming up for re-election in 2 years.
Very interesting.
Be the best candidate.
And let's talk a little bit about Secretary of State. Of course, that's a pick that was just made a couple days ago. This Rex Tillerson, who was the chairman and CEO of Exxon. And this is a guy who now is going to be Secretary of State. There was a photograph in the paper. It showed him standing next to Putin as they were consulting on some deal they made somewhere. When, of course, he was acting as chief of Exxon. And there's an implication that it's too cozy a relationship. What do you know about Rex Tillerson and his views on things? Is he similar-minded to Trump, or are there differences there, too?
Well, they're both successful businessmen.
Okay.
So that's what they have a lot in common. And when I first heard it, I'm like, why Rex Tillerson? I mean, Romney was being considered, Petraeus was being considered.
I like Gingrich.
Rudy Giuliani, too, was being considered as well, right? So it was kind of a surprise that he went there.
I agree.
But once again, as I understand it, it's not exactly like they were friends before, but he thought this was the guy for the job. Tillerson has had a lot of international connections, been able to put deals together in the international arena. And my comment is, geez, if he can put a deal together with Russia and come out ahead for ExxonMobil, well, at least someone's done that, okay? We haven't done that lately, especially under this administration. So I like that. And, whether you believe in climate change or not, that's got nothing to do with what I'm about to say. Rex Tillerson does. So there's a chairman and CEO of ExxonMobil who does. Donald Trump does not. But it still did not prevent Donald Trump from picking him.
Those are the kinds of issues that can really divide people.
I know.
But here he's saying, even though you think differently on something that is such a divisive issue, I can work with you.
Exactly.
I'd like to have you on my team.
So I think it's great that both of them have open minds. And hey, maybe what we do need, and I brought this up before we went on the air, watching Morning Joe on MSNBC this morning. My wife normally has it on, and they were talking about the really amazing comparisons between General Eisenhower and when he came in, his administration, and what Trump is doing, and how Eisenhower picked people who he did not know, people that did not help him out on the campaign, but were the best for the job. Mostly business people, mostly very successful business men and women. So I don't know if Trump's read the book on Eisenhower or great minds think alike, which might be the case. But it's just kind of, I found that to be really an eye-opener. So he's not the first guy to do it this way.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Eisenhower, of course, I was a kid
Yeah.
when Eisenhower was president, and but from what I understand, he was a good president, well liked.
Yes.
Certainly, he won World War II
That's right.
for the U.S. for the West.
Great
and,
leader.
And I think he did a good job as president. He was the last of the military leaders that we had as president, and he's done a fine job. He did do a fine job. Back then, I think that Trump, if he's modeling himself, even subconsciously, after somebody like that, I think that that's certainly good.
And what I think it shows, either Trump is reading the books or paying attention to what others have done, other successful people have done, or people around him have, and he's getting the advice. I mean,
and he's taking the advice.
And he's taking it.
Some of the characteristics that he seemed to exhibit during the campaign that he got a lot of criticism for was he'd fly off the handle, work off the cuff. He'd leave the monitor, the script behind, and go off and do his own thing. But he seems to be much more controlled. I think very strong. And sending very strong messages. We talked about the message that General Mattis sends. What about the message that Ryan Sink sends, or that Rex Tillerson says? What do you think about the messages these guys send? Rex, as a businessman, maybe he's sending a message that says, I can get a deal done, and we're going to deal, and we're going to win in our deals.
Right. That's right. Well, and they have. So why not take a guy who has been successful at that? And I understand, look, everybody's a little sensitive with Russia. Right?
Sure.
They're not. Look, I fought in the Cold War for most of my career. I spent a lot of time on the Russian border up in Norway, 3 tours up there, 3 different exercises, preparing for the Russians to come across the line. So I get the whole Russian thing. They're bad actors. The KGB was bad actors, etc. But you're going to have to deal with these people somehow. We're going to have to sit down at the table on a lot of issues.
Yes, we are.
Look, we're in Syria right now. Their planes are flying in the air. Ours are there. We got troops on the ground. So there has to be communication. So perhaps, who best but someone who's communicated successfully with Putin in the past, because this administration can't point to anyone that they've had successfully communicating with Putin.
No, they certainly can't.
Certainly Hillary Clinton hasn't.
Right.
And so, I think it's a good thing.
I think so too. Let's transition to domestic stuff for just a second. His choice for Secretary of Education, this woman DeVos. I think I'm pronouncing her name properly. She's someone who favors school choice, and has been an active charter school proponent. Now, of course, education is a big factor. We talked a lot about it on this show here. Not when you've been here, because we normally deal about these national defense kinds of issues, but certainly education in this country is a big issue.
Oh, man. And one of the most important.
One of the most important.
Probably one of the more important things you deal with as an alderman.
Well, it's more than half of our budget. We spend an awful lot of money, and 85% of that is salary. One gentleman came in and spoke during the aldermanic meeting the other night. He said that on this new teacher's contract that we just signed, it's a 1-year contract, but the cost of the teachers all up is about $86.5 million, something like that. And he said if there's 85,000 people, man, woman, and children, in Nashua, that's $1,000 per person, not $1,000 per voter, but $1,000 per heartbeat in the city of Nashua for that contract. And that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. On the other hand, the charter schools, they wanted some tax relief, and the tax relief would have amounted to $1 per person in the city of Nashua. And the tax relief for the charter schools was rejected, but the contract that ultimately costs you and me and everyone else, our families, $1,000 per person is accepted. And there's clearly some issues with education. And when I look at it and I see that this person's selection, DeVos' selection, it sounds to me like there's a message being sent there too. And the message is there's some needed reform in education. as much as there is needed reform in so many other
That's right.
aspects from the last 8 years. So I'm hoping that there's going to be some change there too.
I think it's a great move. Let's face it, charter schools, every time you open up the paper and there's a story on charter schools, the
Story
kids are
just
doing
last
great.
week. They're
I
doing
know.
great.
They're doing great. So once again, why not take someone who's been successful at the program,
Right.
believes in that successful program, and put him in charge of something like Secretary of Education? I think it's a fantastic idea.
So here we are, 38 days into
Yeah.
into the cycle, into
Right.
or since election, not even inauguration yet, and we're seeing a lot of activity. I think some of the activity that we're seeing is quite good.
You know who we forgot to mention?
Who?
Rick Perry,
Rick Perry.
Secretary of Energy.
Yes, I saw that too. And
Now,
there's a
they
guy
don't-
from an energy state.
Energy state, but they asked Rick Perry when he was running, what department would you eliminate? And what do you think he said? The Department of Energy. So
Yes.
Trump, what an amazing thing.
Right.
So Trump has picked him to be in charge of the department that Rick Perry said either needs to be done away with or pared down. So apparently he's thought about it. What better guy to have that job?
And how about the guy who was in charge of the EPA?
Yeah,
This is a guy, I forgot his name,
right.
who-
I have two.
who sued the EPA on a number of occasions for egregious regulation that was really being a hamper to his business efforts. And so here's somebody who knows how it works, recognizes the dysfunction,
Right.
not necessarily saying I want to throw it out,
Yeah.
but recognizing there are some serious issues here. And what better person to get in there than someone who has seen it, has dealt with it, and knows that some changes have to be made.
And so, that seems to be the trend. Everyone that Trump is picking for these jobs have had experiences with the agency they're going to. They know what to do. They're good. They've been successful people on the outside world. They're not part of that so-called swamp down in D.C.
Yeah.
And I can tell you right now, we all know this, if Hillary Clinton was elected, that'd be a whole different scene down there. You see
Yes.
the old crony people
Yep.
that used to hang around with the Clintons, that used to be involved in D.C. politics and government. They'd be the people in charge.
Yes.
Mad Dog Mattis would not be anywhere near the Pentagon
Nope.
if Hillary Clinton was in charge.
And Iran wouldn't be shaking in their boots.
That's right.
I think the rest of these folks too are on notice that we're going to behave more like the way that we should.
That's right.
We are the most powerful nation in the world, and it came based on hard work.
Right.
And I think that we are a force for good in the world.
We do.
And we don't want to be trampled upon. We don't want our friends and allies to be trampled
Right.
upon. And so we're going to stick up for ourselves and for our friends.
Right. And so we need to continue. I was reading this great story. It's a little sideline to this, but this lady from Iraq, she was actually a girl when we had the invasion, but she saw these Marines, and she respected these Marines so much, and the Marines did such a good job in her town and community. She wanted to grow up to go to America to become a Marine. And so I say that not because of the Marine Corps, but that's the American way.
Yes.
We are the good people. Okay?
Yes.
So we don't need to apologize for anything. We're not out there. We don't want anybody's oil. We don't take over oil.
No.
We go in. We want freedom. We want liberty for people. And yeah, we're going to protect democracy.
Yep.
And we're going to protect our own people.
Yep.
And we might have to do it preemptively, which
We may have to. Let's talk finances for a little bit.
Yep.
Of course, Trump is a businessman,
Yep.
and he's famous for being on a show and saying, "You're fired."
Right.
Right? He took a look at the Air Force One contract, and he pretty much said, he didn't say you're fired, but he said, stop that, cut that contract.
Yeah.
We're going to rethink
know.
this. He did the same with F-35.
I know.
If I'm not mistaken.
They did.
He's made some
He's
promises.
tweeted about both of them. His venue is Twitter.
Yes, it is. I don't do much on Twitter, but maybe I should.
The good thing is, Dave, I like it because it's only 140 characters. I think that's why Trump likes it too. Because you got to think about what you got to say.
If you can't say it in 140
That's
characters,
right.
well, then you're just talking too much.
And apparently, I was reading more about Trump today, not to go back to him, but that's been his story like all along, which is less is better. And when people brief him, he wants a brief, not a lengthy PowerPoint presentation, 20 pages long.
That's all about that person wanting to hear themselves talk.
Right.
And it's about filling the air with stuff that's meaningless. And it's about maintaining really a status quo.
Yep.
From those meetings, the end result is usually, gee, we should think about this some
Yeah,
more.
that's right.
As opposed to, you know what, here's what we're going to do.
Form a committee. You need to form a committee to
Right.
think about it.
And I think we got to get to the point where this is what we're going to do. And speaking about what we got to do,
Yeah.
we have a big problem with national debt.
Yep.
We're nearly $20 trillion, if I'm not mistaken. That's an awful lot of money. I heard an example one time from my brother, actually, who's a mathematician. He said, if you were to just look at a watch and see seconds tick by, 1 second after another for minutes, hours, days, weeks. How many seconds? How long would it take to see 1,000,000 seconds? It would take 11 days. How long would it take to see 1,000,000,000 seconds? 33 years. How long to see 1,000,000,000,000 seconds? 33,000 years. So when we hear about million, billion, and trillion, and it's hard because the numbers just get so big, we can't really comprehend them. But if you think about 1,000,000 seconds being 11 days, and that's a big number. I'd like $1 million, right? But 1,000,000,000,000 seconds being 33,000 years, and now we're at nearly 20 trillions of dollars in debt. This is a very large problem.
Yeah.
And he's made statements that he wants to start bringing that down.
Yeah.
And maybe doing things like cutting programs. Now, we need an Air Force One of some kind.
Right.
I don't think he's going to cut it out entirely,
Right.
but we got to start spending money wisely, and if we're going to try to work that number down. Yeah. And I think that just like he's making some good picks, I think he's got his own good business skill and an ability to look through it and say, there's fat in this contract. Many of these contracts, of course, have no competition.
Right. Now,
So there's more likely to be some
I got to
fat in
tell you,
there.
though, here's the bad news or the sobering news. We now we've got a Republican in the White House. We've got the House. We've got the Senate. There's no reason for us not to get these things done. There's no reason not to reduce the debt. If we do not reduce the debt, we deserve to get our hands slapped.
I think that's the case.
Because we've got the opportunity to do it now. And, Trump is the ultimate businessman who can look at the bottom line. But this country, it's completely out of control. Like you say, people don't even, you know why it doesn't matter? Because we're going to walk out of here today. The roads are still going to be there. The food's still going to be there. The government's still going to be doing what the government does. And everybody thinks trillion, billion, zillion.
What difference does it
What
make?
difference does it make?
But it
someone's
makes a
gonna
big
win.
difference.
It does. And the adults, hopefully the adults are now in charge.
Yeah.
Down in Washington, the swamp will be drained, hopefully. And it's time to get the number crunchers out and say, what do we got to do here?
It is, and it's not just on the national level, it's also on the states. We look at the results, gubernatorial races nationally. We have a lot of Republican governors now, the majority, and we've got a lot of houses, state houses and state senates that are Republican. Just like here in New Hampshire, we've got a Republican governor, a Republican House, and a Republican Senate. So I think that we can get things done here. And Sununu said, if we can't get it done, we're done. It's going to be a short ride.
Short ride. That's
Short
exactly
ride.
what he said. And he's right there.
He is.
I mean, that's one thing about being in power. When you're in power, then it's
No
better be
excuses.
doing something.
We got to do it. Gary, we're out of time.
I can't believe it.
I can't believe it either.
Wow.
Thank you very much for coming in.
My pleasure.
I was always glad to have you here. I'm always glad to have you. I like talking and thinking about national things. It's fun doing the stop signs and the school budgets and all that sort of stuff on a local level, but I really enjoy the interchange that we have. We have a chance to have here when we talk about national issues. So thank you very much for coming in. Look forward to having you again. You have a show that airs in Manchester, right? A radio show. Tell us about that real quickly.
Every Friday at noon,
Okay.
WLMW 90.7 FM at noon, Veterans Voices with Colonel Gary Lambert.
All right, good. We'll look forward to
Thank you.
listening to that too. And I want to thank you folks at home too for tuning in to Perspectives. My name is David Schoeneman. I'm your host on this program. I'm here with Colonel Gary Lambert, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to us at perspectivesnh@gmail.com. Thanks, and see you next time.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.